danger from within is that we're going to have people telling us that disinformation is a problem in this country. And of course, they have the solution. And so everybody needs to be, I just heard Hillary Clinton say the other day on TV, we have to have we have to do something about disinformation in this country. I'm like, oh, really? Well, let's just tear up the first, the Constitution.
Yeah, they want to get rid of the Constitution, the First and Second Amendment, right?
Yeah. Who cares about the First Amendment? Who cares about free speech? Like, if it doesn't support, a certain ideological wing of this country, then it's no good. We don't need it. It's disinformation. You know why? Because they're telling cities, just like they said about
who
COVID.
deems what is to me, what bothers me, is very subjective. Who deems what's disinformation?
Of course, that's the whole thing. The whole point is that, like, they're telling us this disinformation must be true. I mean, but I would say to them, okay, this administration actually set up a disinformation bureau. They were working on that until it came to light. They were doing it. And then people say, are you kidding me? Like, they don't understand the First Amendment. There's a wing of the when you say the dangers from within, there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed talking about how liberal professors and the left in this country are talking about what an inconvenience the Constitution is. We got to get rid of it. I'm not making, this is the Wall Street Journal editorial talking about what's actually being said in the academy, inside the Democrat Party. The Constitution is inconvenient for modern times. We got to get rid of it. This is about disinformation or malinformation. You just saw Robert Kennedy's testimony. Robert Kennedy Jr. on the Hill just testified to the malinformation. He was labeled malinformation. It wasn't misinformation. It was just information that was inconvenient or contradicted the government's message. How dare someone do that? So this is the problem. I've said this on record. The National Intelligence Council, which is the State Department and the CIA, they have a group that does global trends, asked what was the worst problem facing this country in the next 4 years. One of my mentors, who I will not mention, said the problem is misinformation, disinformation. And I wrote, the problem is that people that I used to respect on the left think that the problem is misinformation, disinformation. This is like the greatest problem facing the United States, that these people want to rip up the Constitution and don't seem to understand the value or what free speech is actually designed to protect. It's not designed to protect the correctness of information. It is designed to protect the most reprehensible speech. It is designed not to protect things that we agree on or we find acceptable. It's designed to protect the most horrible things we can think of. And that's what free speech is about. It is not about what they seem to think is. Now, getting back to your question.
That's exactly right. And I just want to stress that point. Yeah. It's about protecting our disagreement.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Things we find reprehensible. You don't need to protect things that we all agree on.
Welcome to the Rose Show podcast. Welcome to the Rose Show. I'm here again for the second time with Dr. Randall Schweller. We call him Randy, a top scholar in international relations, neoclassical realist, and he's well known for his work as a grand theorist of international relations. He's an amazing professor at Ohio State University, the director of the program for the study of realist foreign policy, editor-in-chief of Security Studies. I could go on and on. He's written amazing books right here. This is how it all began, how I found Randy. Amazing book. Everyone should read Maxwell Demon. And he's also an amazing guitar player. He was in the Grateful Dead cover band called Timberwolf. So grateful to have you here today, Randy. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Rosanna. You're my favorite interviewer. But you're so nice. I hope I can live up to half of what you said.
Please. I could have gone on another whole page of accomplishments of yours, but I stopped right there. But thank you so much for being here. Now, Grateful Dead. Now, when we see you and we read your papers and we read this amazing book, we never think of Grateful Dead guitarist. And Timberwolf was known in this area as like one of the best cover bands ever. Amazing story there. Could you
Well,
tell us a little bit about Grateful Dead and you?
we started in the 70s, probably the late 70s, 77, 78. We started, I think we went to 83, around that, and we played a lot of gigs in the tri-state area, and the Dead, Tucker Carlson. It's funny when I see other Republicans, conservatives, many of them are Deadheads, like Tucker Carlson. He loves the Dead, and I don't know what it is that I'm sure people don't associate Republicans or MAGA people with Grateful Dead, but somehow I find that there's a real nice synergy there. We like freedom. We like a marketplace of ideas. There's something about the Dead.
I
Like I
love
said,
them.
there's nothing like a Grateful Dead concert.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, when I first got it, well, I bought the first record when it came out, which was 67. And then we waited a long time for them to come out with a second record, which is Anthem of the Sun, which was like nothing anyone ever heard. The first record was kind of conventional. It didn't really capture the real psychedelic strangeness of the Dead at that time. But Anthem of the Sun was everything you could have wanted. And I think it was that record that started this whole, at least for people who weren't in the Bay Area and didn't go to the acid test, I think that record just started this love affair with everything Grateful Dead, because it was just otherworldly. There was something, even from the cover of the record to, you can put that record on today and it's just, mind-blowing how experimental it is, and how uh in a way, it's almost calming. It's like almost like a religious experience at times, because you're just taken on some journey into the cosmos. There was just something so magical. I think it really played a big role, enormous role in my scholarship, and like the stuff I wound up writing, the books, the articles, what people knew me for, because I think I never did psychedelics. So, I don't know. I'm sure they're everything that, people say they are, that they're, the doors to perception, that they open up,
Mhm.
all kinds of, and I'm sure it's true. I never did it. I'm a little, I didn't want to wind up like Sid Barrett or, some other people go unmentioned. I just didn't want to play with my brain that way. But I think the fact that I did all those strange, I was allowed to do all those strange evenings where we would just improvise for 4 hours at a time and just go to places we never would go or never thought we would go, because, you just arrive. It's a collective thing and you don't know how you get there. I think that really influenced my work as a scholar, because I would always look at things differently, like from an orthogonal place, so that I
Mm.
never took anything straight on. And it's good for my career. It's been great for my career. It really separated me from other people. But um, but in a way, I'm very unconventional as a writer, in terms of books. But I think I always looked at things from a different perspective than everyone else. So because I use that part of my brain. There used to be these commercials that would say, you should teach your kids how to learn an instrument. They should learn an instrument because it will help their brains develop. So true. I think those neurons or whatever, those connections you make as a musician, because so much of music is abstract and like it's you can't express it in language. It has to be through music. And pattern recognition is really good. So like when you read, it carries over into everything you do. Like you develop a part of your brain. It's a very strange, particular part. It's not good for much of anything probably, except pattern recognition probably, and creative thinking, which is, I'm not saying it's very good. It's good for a lot of things, but I mean, it's a good way. I think
love it.
musicians have always been good at seeing things that we think are familiar and showing us that they're not as familiar as we think. Shedding new light on things we thought we knew. I'll
Very
shut up
profound.
now, let you
No, I
talk.
love it. Very
I just kind of
profound.
relating how music and
Yeah, well,
particularly
you're very
jazz would,
unconventional,
yeah,
Randy.
would
And that's
help.
why I love, this book was in
Oh,
international
oh,
relations, but I was like, this
yeah.
is different. And I'm being a Greek mythology aficionado. I minored in it, but
I'm not.
Maxwell's Demon and the Golden Apple
Yeah.
really, the golden apple, the
Yeah.
apple of discord, it really appealed to me. And then the global
Mm.
discord in the new millennium. And it was such a fun read. And it was so creative and so deep and almost
Yes.
like a psychedelic trip. It was like just so colorful and animated. And, it only could be created through this different, like you said, the abstraction and the different perspective, seeing things differently, and you provide a fresh perspective on, the global order of things or disorder,
Mm.
and the entropy, and being able to talk about entropy, which is a physics term, and
Mhm.
it's scientific, and you apply it to geopolitics and
Mhm.
international relations, and
Mhm.
politics is just profound and just amazing, and I just love it. And
Well, thank you.
that's why we're here. Music and math, they always talk about music and math are related. I think the whole brain is, it's all connected. And if we're able to, open up different parts of our brain, and the musical, it's actually provides new avenues into different areas of our lives, and provides more color. And it's just, what a great way you explained it, and we appreciate you so much. And I love talking to you. And this podcast, and you and I are both about truth and freedom. And
Yeah.
it's about, and I think the dead is symbolic of that, at
Yeah.
the purest sense, when you go deep in your soul. And the
Mm.
music that comes so deep is truth. And
Mm.
the dead is seen as truth
Mm.
and freedom, because in the truth there's freedom, and the truth will
Mhm.
set us all free.
Mhm. Like I
So
say, God knows the truth. We're
exactly,
trying. We're trying. I mean, we're
we're
both
trying.
Catholic. I'm becoming Catholic. You are Catholic. We were talking
Yeah.
about that before, but I don't know the truth. I don't write the truth. That's for sure. I try to I try to come up with things that are
Mhm.
insightful and have a truth to them. And this is like my book. I think it's very different than most social science works, particularly in my field, because I don't like the cookie cutter type of
No cookie
yeah, I mean, I
cutter.
can understand that some people would say, well, that's a cop out. The social scientists with the smocks on, and the all the, quantitative,
Yeah.
with the error term and measure. I think that when you think of the field of international relations, what a gigantic field it really is. I mean, it's about things that cross borders. I mean, it could be about anything. Anything is international, right? If it's wars, things that cross borders, transglobal organizations, and anything really can be thought of as international relations. Um, so it's a huge field. And if when people say, well, talk about international relations, what's going on in international relations? Well, you know, here again, it's like it just depends on how you want to look at it, how you want to approach it. There's so much going on, and there's so much noise, and there's
Yeah.
so much information. And so then your job maybe is to try to, pattern recognition, recognize something that's happening out there through all the noise. What do you see any patterns that are make
Mhm.
sense, are salient, or will that we'll look back on 40 years from now and say, well, that was starting. Nobody was seeing that at the time. We do this all the time in history, so you can look at things from so many different lenses. Like you could take the profound, big historical movements, of history, the the gigantic waves of history, or cycles of history, or just if you want to take a very grand view, then you can say, well, what are those profound things that are happening, maybe at a glacial pace to the point where you don't even see them. They're almost imperceptible, and yet they're the moving forces of history. I like that aspect of it. I was actually asked once by the national interest that's where the entropy thing came from, by the way. So it actually works quite well. The national interest in 2009 asked me to participate in a series they had with very good people, very historians, social scientists, people like that. It was called A First Look at History, something like that. Yeah, like a first take on, I don't know, something like that, first take on history. And they asked me to write something, they said, that about international relations that is going on that nobody sees and probably won't see for another 25 years, but will be a big, major, profound thing that was happening. And I wrote a piece that they called, I didn't actually name it, but it was when I started talking about entropy in world politics, they called it ennui, Ennui, like boredom becomes us. I understand how they got that, because they were looking at the micro level, where I was talking about how the information revolution, or the information age, was just throwing so much information at us, like, you know, like a fire hose, and that people tend to react to large amounts of information in two ways. Well, they tend to get bored, believe it or not, because they can't process it. So it's like, when so much is going on and everything can be true and everything is true and false because there's so much, you can't parse it out, then everything just becomes, you know, I don't know, I can't adjudicate truth from something that's false. So I'll just, you know, one thing you do is just shut down. I can't do it. It's like a lot of people in this country, they don't care about politics anymore. They're so-called apathetic, but that's because it's too much. You know, they hear everything and its opposite is true, and they just throw up their hands and go, I'm done. And then there's the other side. So I was saying that another take is like, when you get so much information, it's like listening to Bartok from like 1906. You know, if you ever hear Bartok, it's like, it's atonal. It's like a cacophony of sound. And I find it fascinating as a musician. I understand what I mean, but you know, your typical non-musician listener just hears atonal stuff coming at them, and they can't find a theme, so it just sounds like noise, and then they shut down. And it's the same thing if you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and you hear something like a minimalist like Einstein on the Beach. Who wrote Einstein on the Beach? I just can't remember. Anyway, you know, I know people think I'm stupid, but I actually saw Einstein on the Beach at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. But anyway, it comes at you so slow that you don't notice that things are changing, because it's that minimalist kind of view. Like even the dance that was, I saw the opera, or you know, the piece on at Brooklyn Academy of Music, where it had a stage show with it, and things weren't changing, and it was all night. So, and I was with Paul Simon and Garfunkel.
Ooh.
Yeah, he was sitting there with his son, and it started at like 11 o'clock at night. I think it went to 6 in the morning. And the other strange thing is, one of my colleagues in Ohio State, turns out, I mean, this is way before I came to Ohio State, he was there too in the audience, John Mueller, which is very strange. And nothing happens, but it is happening. If you played the tape really fast, you would see that things are happening, but your brain can't process things that are happening at a very slow speed. So things that are happening at a really fast pace that are just cacophonous, we shut down. Things that are happening really slow, where there's not enough information, we shut down. So, you know, we tend to, in this information age, people are tending to shut down, like rather than open up, and you would think, well, we're in the information age, you know, people must be really stimulated, you know, they must be like, they're all drinking coffee, they're getting all this information, they must be really smart, you know. But it turns out like information isn't knowledge at all. It's not wisdom, it's not knowledge. It actually has like an opposite effect in some ways, because you need to process it. And so when you have all this information coming at you, right? What's the thing that's scarce? You're like you're an economist, you know, you understand like when things, you know, whenever there's things that are plentiful, they make something scarce.
Mhm.
So what is it that information makes scarce?
Well, our
Attention.
attention.
Attention. Like you don't, if you have too much information, what's scarce is your attention. You don't have
Mhm.
an attention span.
You
That's why
know, there's a
people tend to
great
shut down.
quote. Herb Simon said, "A wealth of
Yes.
information
Yeah.
is a poverty of attention."
That's it. Yes, there you go. That's exactly what I'm thinking of, Herb Simon.
Yes,
So I'm
exactly.
asking an economist, and that's why I get that answer.
I love it. Behavioral economics. Economics is great. It encompasses so many different areas. But you know, I think I'm gonna start with entropy right out of your
Okay.
book. And we
Okay.
want to talk about the post-hegemonic world, and there's so much there with that and geopolitics. And I want to know your take on the current events that are going on in the world. But entropy, okay? And I gotta say, this book was written in 2014. You were ahead of your time, and you really foretold of what's to come with the rise of social media and this information overload. When
Mm,
is information just too much? And it's like a bell curve. When you're telling me about too
mm,
little and too much, how we just like cancel it out. It's like we want to be somewhere in the balanced middle. And we're just in this information overload. We just getting too much, and you call it the infosphere, and the truthiness and the rise of
yeah.
social media. And then there's
Yeah.
misinformation, disinformation. There's just so much.
There's a new
And
one, malinformation.
right. And
That's
exactly.
information the government doesn't want you to say.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Another one right
They're
there. And
they're getting after RFK Jr. That's what they brought
with
against
the
him. He was
vaccines and the health.
purveying malinformation.
Wow. And then so there's signal versus noise. And I
Yeah.
know last time we met, you talked about sorting, how it's so important. We have to like become
Mhm.
master
Yeah.
sorters in
Mhm.
order to sort of make
Right.
sense of this
Mhm.
information that's thrown at us. So are we in this rising entropy? Are we at max? Does entropy at some point maximize? I mean, is there going to be something like how far can it go? What are your thoughts with entropy and all this information that we have all around us? It just seems to be increasing with maximum disorder.
Hmm. Let me think. Yeah, no. That's the question. It's
Will
I
it
think the
get
question,
worse
so we
before
have
it
to
gets
take,
better?
yeah, I think I'm trying to think about, so there's a micro level and there's a macro level. Like the micro level is the personal. So how does information overload affect personal relationships and your ability to process information as a human being? That's one level of
Mm-hmm.
analysis. So let's start with the individual and information overload. So as I was saying, I think people tend to get bored. They tend to get apathetic because they can't deal with the amount of information that's being thrown at them. And so they tend to tune out. It's like,
The
what's it say?
bounded rationality.
Yeah, or turn on, turn off, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Yeah, um, that they tune out because it's just too much. And look, you know, people have to do. They have to put a roof over that. And it's hard enough to do all these things, and then you know. So you have the internet. Okay, you have the information. I don't want to sound like a Luddite. Like I love the internet and I like having information at my fingertips. I do, but you know, that is my job sort of to process information as a professor and to write. You know, I am very privileged in society. I understand the privilege that I have and the burden of responsibility because I have the right to pontificate. You know, I get the right to say, you know, look at things and pontificate. And I just have to dot my I's, cross my T's, And that is some kind of privilege. I understand that. And so the information age is very good for me in some ways, because it's unbelievable where we've come. I mean, literally, like, we have to think about this. I started grad school in the 86. I was using a typewriter. I wasn't even on a computer yet. Personal computers were, they were around, but, I was still typing my papers. And I remember, like, the faculty at Columbia, they'd all type their dissertations. Imagine, like, you want to change a footnote. Footnote number 471 has to be changed. Well, how do you do that? You literally have to type something up and cut and paste and staple on top. It was unbelievable how different the world was. You didn't have the internet. I was in 95, 96. I saw some people when I came to Ohio State looking at their computers like incessantly. They were looking. I was like, "What are you doing?" And they were like, "Oh, we're on the internet." I was like, "What the internet?" And it was like, it was dial-up, dial-up internet service, and it was like that strange noise, and downloading things took forever. I mean, like, it would take 20 minutes to download a 30-second clip. So anyway, we've come so far. It is an unbelievable age that I can go to the library at home. I can get anything I want at home. Like, that's unbelievable. I mean, in terms of, you can't, like, gainsay that. You can't underestimate how different it was when, you couldn't get things at home. You had to go to the library, and if you wanted to keep it, you'd have to Xerox it. And Xeroxing meant putting a nickel in a machine, and every time you did a page, you'd have to carry like 50 nickels in your pocket, or dimes. This was not convenient for anything. So yeah, that's good. On the downside, though, I think processing information is like a full-time job. You mentioned sorting. Well, yeah, you've got to Maxwell's Demon, the title of the book. He's a made-up fantasy sort of creature that they used to do in the 19th century. They did, they still do, but when we talk about the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, they would do thought experiments, and so they would create these things called demons to say, well, if there was, how could we, entropy is, for your audience, is rising disorder. Let me explain it this way. It's like, there was a commercial once, I can't remember what it was. It was for like a Swedish, they made like things like chainsaws and mowers and things for your lawn, clean up. And it was this commercial, like, it explained entropy in such a great way. It wasn't trying, but it did. The commercial would have things growing all over the place, like vines growing on trees and grass getting longer and everything just going to hell. Your lawn was just, it was unkempt. It was just like, what would happen if nature just took over and it did all these things? And then the garage door opens, and you hear this chain. It's like the chainsaw, Texas chains, and it comes out, and it's like, you understand, like, this person is serious. They have their, whatever Swedish made, chainsaw and things. They're gonna clean up that lawn. They're gonna order things. Like, so nature tends to disorder, and we impose order. So we do this all the time with our lawns, with our gardens. We're imposing an order on nature. Nature just wants to go crazy and just do things. So things tend towards entropy. Things tend towards chaos and randomness and disorder. And you need an orderer to impose order on things that would naturally be more, in a sense, variegated. Like, so one of the things about entropy is it's rising in nature. I call it like nature's arrow. When I first started the project, I was thinking, time's arrow is like, if you believe that history is moving forward, like, if you think that history has an end point, like there was this whole thing, End of History in 1991 by Francis Fukuyama. It's a very famous article where the idea, the thesis was that history was moving forward in a teleological direction. This used to be the Marxist view, that socialism is the highest stage of capitalism, but so history was moving in a direction, there was nothing you could do. Well, it turns out that like capitalism is the highest form of social whatever, so capitalism really is the end point, and market capital or capitalist democracy was supposed to be the end of history. We've reached the end of history, there's nothing better, and the rest of the world will just be caretakers at a museum of history, because history is about a concussion of ideas. That's how history unfolds. Ideas have to concuss, and we get ideological battles, which anyone who lived through the Cold War or the Second World War with fascism, Bolshevism, and democracy know that history was about a clash of ideas. And so he's saying, well, there are no more ideas, so history's over. That's a teleological view. But entropy, I couldn't figure out what is entropy if that's that, because that is really about order, the end of history. Like we've hit the perfect order, democratic. But it turns out nature's arrow really is entropy, that things just tend towards randomness and chaos. And if you're a mathematician, a simple, like entropy is something that is so present, and yet it's somewhat hard to get your head around it, because there's a thing called information entropy, which is, to relate it to the conversation we're having, noise in your environment. So much information that it becomes random and chaotic and you can't process it. And so you get the noise to signal ratio is so high that, it's hard for human beings to process, to sort the information and make sense of it. Because that's what we do every day, we sort. So going back to what I was saying about the way you could think about entropy, though, is a very simple way to think about it is that things that are more possible and probable tend to show up more than things that are less probable. So like when you think of your lawn, it's not probable that your lawn is going to cut itself, or that flowers will all grow in a row, or things, it's possible, but nature doesn't tend to look like that. It's not that ordered. So the most random distribution is the one that is going to show up more in the real world. And that's called entropy. So like if you took like 50 coins, die, let's say like dice, die, and you just rolled 50 of them. You picked them up, rolled the dice, and then you put it back down. And then you picked it up. Now let's say you started with all one. Every 50 die, all 50 dice were on one. And then you picked them up, rolled them. They wouldn't be on one anymore. The more times, if you did that infinite amount of times, instead of getting like 50 die, the sum total is 50, right? You wouldn't get 50. You would get something like a distribution of what is the most probable distribution. Well, that's entropy. The most probable, you would never get back to 50 die being on the one. You would never get there. You could do it because it's not possible. It's not, but I can do it easily. I just put them in the one. We can do that all day long, right? But see, that's not the way nature works. That's the way we impose order. We can put 50 die on the table, make sure that the face standing, the upward face is a 1, and we can get a total of 50. But nature's never going to do that. And once you break that up, it's never going back. I'll give you another example, just so that people understand, because if we're talking about entropy, you have to understand what I'm saying about this, what's going on. If I have 2 tubes, round, round balls of glass balls with blue and yellow, and I have like a valve in between them. So if I open that valve of blue and yellow and I let the molecules come together, over time it'll produce green. You'll get green. It'll be a uniform green. You'll never get those molecules back, so it'll be yellow and blue again, right? So what we've lost is like, we've lost variety. We'll never have red, we'll never have yellow and blue again. We're just going to get green. So that's like life. Life is like you know, unless you have someone ordering things, you're just going to get like kind of looks like randomness, chaos, disorder. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Again, it's a hard concept to sort of get your head around.
It's great. It just continues and it just goes on and you can never go back. It's like a past the point of return. It's
Well,
like
you could go back if you are the one in charge, if you're an orderer,
the
but not if
order.
it's just not if there's nobody to order things. And what I'm saying about international politics is that it's not going to have an orderer anymore. You say, well, who ordered international politics? Well, we had these things, these gigantic wars. And at the end of those gigantic wars, let's call them hegemonic wars, they crowned like one state king, you know, and they knocked out everything. There would be these, like, think after World War II, the world was in ruins. And the US was on the sidelines, and we were the only power. We had 50% of the world's GDP. Think about that. The United States held 50% of the world's GDP in 1945. That's humongous amount of power. And we could create an international order because we were a legitimate authority. We weren't the ones involved in we were involved in the big war, but we were on the sidelines. And this was the Second World War after the First World War, 25 years earlier, where 20 million people died. 40 million people died 25 years later. And what happened? Well, we got an incredibly well-ordered international system that's been peaceful ever since in terms of that great power war. I mean, think about, like, the US did create an international order. It was a very profitable order for everyone, except, you know, those that willingly did not participate, like the Soviet Union and North Korea. And look what happened in Cuba. Look what happened to them. You know, they collapsed. But everyone else that was participating in this liberal international order, where, you know, free trade and, you know, mostly built on free trade and things like that. They had US security guarantees, of course, which kept things peaceful. You know, Europe was peaceful, you know, has been peaceful since, which is saying a lot when you look at, you know, how many people they lost in such a short period of time. We were the orderer, you know, we provided an international order, a very durable and, you know, stable international order. But then what I'm getting at is that we can't have another one of these wars. That was the product of the last wars, that really World War I and World War II, but we could simplify to say World War II. Okay. I know people, we could talk about the Cold War, and I could go into that. It complicates things a little, but what I'm arguing essentially is that we will never get, hopefully, another world war again. It's just weapons are too destructive. You know, you can't have a war like that. Nobody could possibly wage a war like that thinking they're going to gain. Remember, a lot of states thought they were going to gain from war. Great power wars like Nazi Germany, you know, fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. You can't do that anymore. Like, people think that, okay, let's move fast forward to the 21st century. What good would a Sino-American war, a total war between the Chinese and the Americans, who could possibly think they're going to win something from that they're going to profit from that? And they're not. It's a simple deduction. You know, it's a simple thing to understand. Nobody could win from another world war or another great power war. But with that's great. I'm all for that. I'm not lamenting that. That's fantastic. But as a side note, I don't think you're going to get a lot of international order. You'll have peace. You might even have prosperity. But I don't think you're going to get order, because the US is no longer going to be the world's hegemonic leader. it has to pull back because we have competition now in the Chinese and elsewhere, and we're fighting, we're trying to promote our own national interests. That's where Trump comes in. So let's bring this very abstract entropy discussion. I'll bring it to the present and I'll shut up, but just to sort of say, okay, this isn't just highfalutin professor guy talking to you, that it does relate. So the whole MAGA Trump movement, to me, is a result of this notion that there is no liberal international order anymore. It's everyone for themselves. We're in a competitive world. We're competing with China. We're competing with some European states. We're competing. And we have to take care of number one. That's what it's really about. It's like we don't want cosmopolitanism. We don't want this Davos, Hillary Clinton, Robert, the Gates mentality, Bill Gates. We're done with that. We don't want to hear from you jet-setting globalists. We know it's good for you to live in a so-called borderless world. Like, look at our southern border, right? They don't seem to care. But Americans really care about their border, and more importantly, they want their government to care about them. They want their government to care about building the American middle class, not the Chinese middle class, right? And that's where Trump comes in, what they call, oh, this terrible thing, populist nationalism. Oh my gosh, he's a fascist. No, he's not. There's nothing wrong with populist nationalism. Remember when the Democrats used to talk about populism? They thought they were the great, they liked populism. And what was Bernie Sanders, by the way, if he wasn't supposed to be the liberal populist? He's going to give everyone health care and, but Trump and the conservatives, we have our own populism, and it's a national populism, and it's about make America great again. Let's put America first. That was the whole thing. Forget make America great again. Let's just, because there's so much emphasis on MAGA. Let's think more importantly, what's the core principle? America first. That's how Trump ran the country. Now, that's how he dealt with China. He said, I don't want war with you. I'm not interested in that, but I'm putting America first. We're not interested in your middle class. We're interested in our middle class. You want to make deals with us? We're all for free trade, but it better be fair trade. And if it's not helping us, and this was their judgment on the treaty, the free trade treaty. What was it called? It's just escaping me. It was the Far East Free Trade Treaty. It's just escaping, but anyone would know. They scrapped it because it's not working for the American people. It doesn't do anything for us. We're not interested in just free trade for the sake of free trade. We're interested in trade that makes Americans better off. That's what we elected Trump to do. And this is what really got under the skin of all these globalists that run the media and the internet, and that were running everything. They're in charge of all these, Silicon Valley, these companies, and the media, and they're globalists. They're not interested in the American middle class or working class. Forget them. They think of those people as middle of the country, people who live in trailers and are racist. They're racist. They're white racists. That's what they think of them. That's how they think of most Americans that are not rich and live on the coast. They just don't even want to talk about it. They're like the ugly stepchildren of, oh, don't look at them, just fly over them, And Trump didn't. He wasn't like that. But why? Because Trump rose. The whole thing happened because of these structural changes, these very profound structural changes, where the United States is coming back to earth in a sense, because others are rising, like China. And remember the financial crisis of 2006, 7 and 8. That really set things in motion. That's when it became clear that this whole unipolar vision of the world that was going to go on and on and on for decades was over, and that we'd been kind of lied to. We didn't see the truth, that the banking system was all messed up, and it really took China to sort of bail us out of this mess. And this is when Americans saw that, hey, this whole global thing has a real downside to it. And they saw that in 2007, 2008, during the financial crisis, the downside of globalization. And they said, we don't want any part of that. They don't want a borderless world, and they don't want to hear about globalism or globalization. And so Trump, this was all about, structural change. And Trump was just a symptom of structural change. He wasn't the cause of it. And so America became more transactional. This is how they would talk about Trump. They'd say, oh, he's a bad guy, he's a transactional president. He actually wants to do transactions. How unseemly, like to actually ask NATO to pay for their security, NATO members. They actually asked the Japanese to pay and the Koreans to pay for American security. What happened to American largesse? What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. The American taxpayer said, stop giving all our stuff away for free. It's not yours to give away in the first place. It's ours. And we're not going to guarantee everyone's security. Why are we guaranteeing NATO to this day? Look at Ukraine. Why did we give Ukraine $140 billion? We're defending Ukraine's borders against Russia. Now, isn't that welfare for the rich? I mean, Europeans are like 45 times richer as a whole than Russia. They can't defend themselves against Russia. They need $140 billion from us. Meanwhile, our border is undefended. All right, they can't spend any money on our border. Remember how they dug in their heels for $20 billion Trump wants for the wall? Oh, no, absolutely not. It won't work. But $140 billion Ukraine, sure, write the check. Who cares? it's our money. It's not Biden's money to give away. It's our money, but what the heck? And he doesn't have to tell you how they say, well, it's obvious it's protecting American national interest, that we have a national interest in Ukraine's border. It's obvious, right? How is it obvious? It is completely untrue. There is no truth in it, not even a kernel of truth to it. I mean, like if Russia feels that Ukraine should not go into NATO, who could blame them? Like, of course. I mean, imagine someone wanted to put Mexico into the Soviet Union. Let's say the Soviet Union had triumphed in the Cold War, and they wanted to put Mexico in the Soviet Union's orbit of, their collective defense system. I don't think we'd be too happy with that. So, Trump is just, he thinks NATO is obsolete. He's right. The Soviet Union's been dead for 30-something years. What the hell is the purpose of NATO anymore? It has no purpose at all. And now they say, well, look, see, Russia. Right. Like, because you expanded NATO to their backyard, right up to their border, you're threatening to do that with Georgia and Ukraine. Putin's saying, no, you're not doing that, because we're not going to allow you to do that. And people say, well, he must be a terrible dictator. Really? I mean, because he wants to make sure that his country does not have NATO members on its border. I mean, do they remember how many Russians were killed in World War I and World War II? I'll just tell you, 7 million Russians died in Stalingrad alone, the Battle of Stalingrad. So we had 3,400 die in 9/11. They had 7 million die in Stalingrad. I mean, anyone can do that math. So why shouldn't they be a little touchy about, NATO expanding to their backyard, up to their border? I mean, it's not understandable, really. So anyway, I'd say Trump is, the whole idea that we're done with NATO or paying for our allies' security. It just makes sense from a structural perspective. Trump. It would have been somebody else if it wasn't Trump, but somebody had to finally stick up for what Americans have been saying for a decade, by the way, that they're done ruling the world. If they ever did that, they're done with the whole thing. They don't care anymore. There's surveys that show Americans, recent surveys, are done with, trying to run the world or even thinking that we could do that. And they actually feel like America is doing more harm than good. And you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, and how can you blame them? I mean, what good came out? Who's being held accountable, by the way? Now, shut up, but it's like, who is being held accountable for the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War? What did we accomplish in those wars? Other than breaking things and killing people, I mean, are you kidding? Like, those wars were so counterproductive, unless the point was to have Iran running the Middle East. And yet Dick Cheney is now become a nice friend for the Democrat Party. Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, they promote them. This is a man, he's criticizing Trump. When Trump was president, no wars, peace and prosperity, no wars. Putin did not do anything under Trump. Nobody did anything with Trump. He cleaned up ISIS, got rid of it. And yet Dick Cheney is criticizing Trump. Trump is a threat to American democracy. Trump is a threat to the American people. What Dick Cheney, who sanctioned the idea that we should go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan to democratize the Middle East. This man is being held up by the press as a knowledgeable person, a respectable person. I mean, between Dick Cheney and Bolton, John Bolton, you couldn't get two more, and I'll throw in Crystal. These neocons, and I'm a Republican, I make no problem, but the Republican neocons were the worst thing that ever happened to the Republican Party. They were so loud wrong, it's unbelievable. And yet the press doesn't even tell people in this country what a neocon is, that they belong to this neocon group, and that they were responsible for these absurd wars that accomplished nothing, did nothing but hurt the American national interest. They bankrupted us to some extent, created all this debt, and they've made the Middle East far worse, more unstable. And I guess if you wanted a plan to make Iran the rulers of the Middle East, well, this was the one to employ. I did not democratize the Middle East.
Yeah, well said. You took us through a long ride there.
A long one.
And a very well said one, and very deep. And you know, there's so many different points I could bring up there. I think we'll just start with this post-hegemonic world that we're in. And you know, should the US be the police officer of the world? And it should not. You know, after, you know, I'm going to give some quotes from your great article. But we got to talk about misinformation, disinformation, and all of that. And now we hear Dick Cheney. I mean, when I think Dick Cheney, I think warmonger. I mean, I think of the ultimate, and then him saying that Trump is the threat to the world order. Is to me, there's so much polarity. You know, both sides are saying each other is this threat to democracy.
Irony, really irony. You know, the idea that Dick Cheney could say that Trump is a danger to America when this man is so loud wrong and did so many things that are demonstrably hurt the United States. He demonstrably did things that were just unconscionable. He was so wrong about what he thought would happen through these wars that you couldn't be more wrong than he was.
Yes. Now, you're an expert in international relations, and before we delve into this, the hegemony, and I want to talk about the current events and the fear. You and I both know the fear tactics, and they like to use them to control and to influence people. And they're throwing around this World War III, nuclear war, and you're saying, you know, it seems that this administration is trying to tempt Russia. They're talking about Russia and the nuclear, and there's all in the news a few weeks ago. What are your thoughts? You're a realist. Please shed some light here. Give us a reality check about this potential World War III and the Middle East conflicts.
I will say,
and nuclear.
I don't think there'll be World War III, but you know, I do think when you start poking the bear who has nuclear weapons for no good reason, and you have shown no empathy for I thought liberals were supposed to be empathetic, although we know
peace, right? Peace,
peace, and we know darn well they're not. They were also supposed to believe in a marketplace of ideas. Isn't that the core tenet of liberalism and liberty, freedom of expression, free speech. There's so much I could say about, and I think is important to say, but I'll get back to, let me start with the question that you asked about Russia. Yeah, I mean, we could get into a nuclear war with Russia, and why? Why do we want to risk a nuclear war with Russia? If we were to say, well, we're going to defeat them in Ukraine, do you think that the Soviets or the Russians are going to allow themselves to be defeated in Ukraine? They'll just go home with their tail dragging between the legs? No, they're not going to do that. And they have nuclear weapons. So, you know, there is no thinking about the end game. There's never is in our foreign policy. It's just, well, the Ukrainians are all of a sudden, they're like great people and they're Democrats, like the founding fathers. They're nothing like that, you know, and like, is Putin, you know, I don't love the man. I'm not saying good, but they say, well, if you don't condemn him and want to fight him tooth, then you must be supporting him. No, I'm a realist. He is a great power. This is his backyard. They have a sphere of influence. They have nuclear weapons. We're not appeasing him. We're just saying, let's make a deal. Trump will come in and say, what? Let's make a deal here. And never, ever again say that, threaten to put Ukraine in NATO or Georgia in NATO. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to respect Russia's sphere of influence. If people don't like spheres of influence, so too bad. That's what exists in that neighborhood. Ukraine will never be able to get up and walk away from the Russian bear. They live next door to them, and they're going to have to learn to live with them. Now, if they were bigger than Russia and more powerful, fine, then they could dictate terms. But that's not the way the world is. The world is such that Russia is the big player in that neighborhood, and they're going to have to live with them. And unless the NATO members, and I mean the Europeans, the Germans, the French, the Czechs, if they want to go fight Russia, go ahead and fight them. It's your backyard, if that's what you want. But they don't. They don't even want to arm to the tune of 2% of their GDP. Oh, the big Russian bear is coming. Let the United States spend 140 billion. What did they spend? You know, how much are they willing to spend? It's their backyard. It has nothing to do with our national security. I don't care what people in DC want you to believe. There is no connection. Russia is not going to take over Ukraine and then say, oh, well, we'll take over the rest of Western Europe. Oh, really? Like Germany, France, they are so much wealthier than Russia. Western Europe is so much wealthier collectively. Now, they might say, yeah, but they don't have this big military. You're right, because we're doing everything for them. Why do they have to spend money on a military if Uncle Sam is going to do it for them? This is the old Uncle Sugar. We'll take care of everything. We'll do everything for you. You know, but we're Uncle Sucker. That's what we are. We take care of everyone's problems. Europe, yes, NATO was there because Europe was, you know, destroyed by World War II. We had to rebuild them with the Marshall Plan. We didn't want the Russians to roll in the tanks, the Soviets. But the Cold War has been over since 1991. There is no Soviet Union. We killed the fire-breathing dragon, you know? He's dead. And now the Europeans are rich, comparatively speaking. We don't need to defend them. So why would we want to get in a nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine? They're not going to conquer Ukraine and then conquer the rest of Europe. They're not going to do that. And I'll tell you this, if the United States, like when Trump said that NATO was obsolete, DC went berserk. I mean, they literally thought, this proves the man is insane. They literally, the media, go back and look what they said in response to Trump making the common sense claim that NATO is obsolete and has been obsolete for decades. Well, look at Putin. Putin is not the Soviet Union. He's not doing anything. He does not have a global agenda. He does not have a global, he's not selling anything like the Soviet Union. He doesn't have a globalist ideology, some universalist ideology. What's the Putin ideology? It's not communism. What is it? Authoritarianism. This, again, like these cold warriors in DC, are still fighting the Cold War. They'll find anything. Well, it isn't communism versus capitalism. It's now authoritarianism versus democracy. No, sorry. That doesn't work. As a realist, whatever countries want to do inside their own country is their problem. We don't care as realists. That's what you want to do. That's what you want. Let the people decide. We're not going to democratize the world. We saw in the Middle East how that works out. That doesn't work. If people choose democracy, they have to choose it. We're not going to impose it on them. We're not going to do it through military force. So if people want to say, well, Putin is leading us, spearheading this China, Russia, anti-democratic world, I just say that's ridiculous. It's none of our concern. We don't care what kind of government you have internally. That's absurd. A realist would never talk about such a thing. What happens internally is for a country to decide. Now, Wilsonian liberals talk like that. They talk about democracy, promoting democracy. Democracies are good governments. Authoritarian governments are bad. Realists don't talk that way. It has nothing to do with us. It's not our business to care what goes on in other countries internally, unless that makes them externally aggressive. But there's nothing to show that. In fact, there's no reason to believe that a democratized Russia is going to be less aggressive. They could be more aggressive. Democratizing states tend to be more aggressive. I could explain, but it has something to do with jingoism and the fact that, they've done studies, and when you're in a democratizing state, you tend to be more susceptible to aggressive foreign policies, recklessly aggressive, because it's really not a democracy, it's a mobocracy. And that's what leads to hyper-nationalism. And hyper-nationalism leads to aggressive, reckless foreign policies. So anyway, a democratizing state's no good. I'd rather have an authoritarian state than a democratizing state. We're talking about peace and stability in the world. Anyhow, it's a long-winded answer, but yeah, I mean, we could, nuclear war with Russia is a bad thing, and we don't want to go there.
Absolutely not. It wouldn't be good for anyone. So I appreciate you shedding a lot of realism in that.
Yeah, you don't hear it in the news though. You don't, isn't it strange that we are poking the bear and nobody's talking about the possibility of a nuclear war, though we're closer to nuclear war these days than we've been in decades and decades.
True. Scary. We have to bring up economics because the time is now to use economics over military. And I think that's exactly what you wrote about in your paper about, we want to be geoeconomics over the geostrategic and military. America first. It's important. We know that inflation is real. Prices are higher than ever. Inflation is underestimated. The CPI is not reporting the true inflation, which is more than double that. Unemployment rate should be about double. We are in a stealth recession. It's tough here in the United States. It's really tough for people. And, manufacturing has been in a recession. The small businesses, the mom and pops are gone. Small business startups are down. They're practically non-existent. And, we have margins compressed in business, lower bottom lines. Labor costs are higher, operating costs are higher, higher costs of goods sold, and businesses are folding. And we're seeing the small businesses, while the big business, the Amazons, are growing and they're taking over, and we have oligopolies. And, it's the free enterprise, the heart of America, the innovation, the small businesses are all in difficulties. So we know that we need to take care of America. And, a hegemon in decline no longer believes that trade is free. And this is a quote from your article. And I want to go further with this article. I want to take it apart because there's so much brilliance in that. And I think everyone needs to understand where we are in time, because like we talked about the dead, and that was a different time. And then it's about the time now. Where are we in 2024 and 2025? And where we need to be with our focus and with America, and let me just give this quote. Unipolarity structure that began with collapse of Soviet Union bestowed the US with enormous unchecked power, no peers or near peer competitors. So there we saw the US as the hegemony. But now we're past that point. And the reality is that after almost 80 years of US leadership, the world has entered a transition phase from hegemonic order to a restored balance of power. Like all prior balance of power systems, this one will feature global dissent, disharmony, and great power competition, enter entropy. Please expand on this balance of power system that we're in at this time.
Well, when at least everyone would agree from 1991 on, there was a unipolar world with the United States as a dominant player. The French called us not just a superpower, we were a hyperpower. And the US really was
drunk with power.
A what?
Were they drunk with power?
Yes, we were. That's why we expanded NATO. We were kind of drunk with power. We thought we could democratize the world. We could promote human rights, all kinds of values. When a country gets really big, and this has never happened before, nobody's ever been as powerful as the United States was after 1991. No state in the history of the world could be that powerful, had that much global reach, that much influence, and that much dominance, just sheer dominance, militarily, economically. I mean, militarily, we were stronger than the next 10 nations combined. And most of those were our allies. And so we had no dangers. We were almost had absolute security, which is remarkable. So there was no global balance of power, which is the first time, at least since 1648, when the modern world system, modern state system came into existence. It was the first time that there was not a balance of power in the world. It used to be a European balance. We kind of talked about a multipolar world, and the powers, all of the action was happening in Europe. And it wasn't until the late 19th century when Japan and the US kind of emerged as great powers that the balance of power spilled over into a global world order or global world system. And so then you get to 1991. So there was always a balance of power. And some might say, well, the Cold War, was there a balance? Yeah, a bipolar balance. You only need two states to have a global balance of power, two superpowers. Some people at the advent of the superpower age, when it was just a bipolar age, thought, well, a balance of power needs at least 3 or 4 powers. No, 2 will do. But then the Soviet Union collapsed. And so what was left? One hyperpower. And so there was no global balance of power. And that made the world very simple in a way. I mean, to understand, there was no conflict. Nobody would dare, think about opposing the United States. Who would do such a thing? And everybody kind of bandwagoned with the United States because we were the only ones in town. We were the last ones left, and it made good sense for everyone to want a good relationship with the United States. So it was kind of like an image of a global image of like the U.S. was like a hub and spoke world, where the U.S. was the hub in the middle of the wheel, and the spokes came out, and that was everyone else. Everyone had wanted a good relationship with the United States, the hub, and we were and they never had as good relations with themselves as they did with us. So everyone was bandwagoning with us, which is really remarkable. And there was no global balance of power. But then China rises, and of course they say in the beginning they want to be part of the U.S. world order. let them in, you know, the World Trade Organization and 2000. And we're building China up, and we're encouraging them to join the U.S. order, and we're talking about them being, you know, we want them to be a global stakeholder, a responsible stakeholder in the global system. And they were actually, they kind of pulled us out of the 2008 financial crisis because they were a good, you know, responsible stakeholder in the global order. But of course, we were building them up, and that's a gamble because, yeah, they're going to play nice while they're rising, but when they get to a certain point, the question is, are they going to continue to play nice, or are they going to say, okay, now that we got the power to do things, we want to shake things up. This international order no longer, wasn't formed when we were around, so we want an order that represents, that reflects our interests and our newfound power. In other words, we want influence and status commensurate with our newfound power. And that shakes up things. So now, so what they do is they have to delegitimize the global order that exists because it's the American order. And that's what you see with Russia and China over the last decade. They've been delegitimizing. It's no longer, it's not legitimate. American authority isn't legitimate. We want a more, quote, democratic international system, a more multipolar international system. And what they really want, so they're now revisionist states that want to overthrow the existing order. And that's bad, right, for the international order. I'm not saying it's bad for us because I don't really care about it. The order, I don't think it, you know, it's fine, but, you know, it's not, you know, we could weigh the costs and benefits. It would be a tough calculation to make, but that would take a whole nother lecture. But they're against it now because it doesn't reflect their interests per se, particularly the Chinese. And then we start rising up against the order. Why? Because that's an order that we paid for, that we made the world peaceful, and we bore most of the, we were the ones bearing a disproportionate amount of the costs. It's the hegemon's dilemma. Like, you pay for international order, and you take on most of the burdens and responsibilities and costs, the enormous costs of managing this international order. And in a way, what you're doing is you're letting others cheat, because it's like, well, okay, so they don't allow free trade, really. They discriminate against American cars, American companies, but we let them come in and do whatever they want in our country. We have open borders, because in the end, a free trade system will still benefit Americans, because we're so much stronger and better than they are, that anything, we can allow them to cheat. But then when it's no longer true anymore, now we're like at the stage where it's like, huh, I'm not paying for their security, and they better open their borders to our goods. They're not being fair. So that's what Trump was saying. He was like, look, this should have happened decades ago. You guys are cheating us, and we're not standing for it any longer. And we're not allowing even our allies. Our allies were like putting 10% tariffs on American goods. And we're paying for their security, and they're putting tariffs on our goods, and we can't compete with them, or we can compete, but it's unfair. And Trump was saying, even our allies, no good. You're not getting away with this anymore. And by the way, all those strategic goods that we need, like things that have military applications, we're not allowing you to make those for us anymore, because that's dangerous. What if something happens? You know, and we don't want to be dependent on you for strategic goods, vital goods. Look what happened during the pandemic. You know, we couldn't get respirators. Like, we found out all the things that we were dependent on China for that we weren't making in this country. And we said, hey, globalization's not working, you know? So we're not for free trade anymore. We're not for just the international order. We're like, look, this doesn't work for us anymore, because all you guys did was free ride on American largesse. And that was fine when we were so rich, it didn't matter to us. But now you're gonna have to pay for what you get. And we want fair trade. We don't just want free trade, we want fair trade. And you're not doing that. You're subsidizing, you're doing all these things. We're not putting up with it. So Trump has a China trade war. And he does the same with Europe. He has kind of trade wars with his own allies. And the free press, the press, not the free press, but the press, the media, who are all like, on the liberal side, weaned on free trade at any cost, everything, free trade. They're like, Trump, man, this guy, he's a protectionist, he's a nationalist, he's a transactionalist, he's just about America first. He's like, to them, he's like that, guy that one of their like relatives that lives in a trailer park that's embarrassing them. That's what Trump was. That's what he was like. If you had to say, what did he represent to these people in DC and inside the Beltway? He was like, my gosh, the American people are electing this man. He's embarrassing us because he's like telling our allies that he's not happy with them. They have to pay for things and they have to open up their, this was just bad manners. It was impolite. But you see, I'm saying that the people demanded in a more competitive world where the US had come down from the clouds in this unipolar world that, was unnatural in a way. And we got a global balance of power emerging, re-emerging. The United States is coming down back to earth. And the American people are saying, we want to win. We want to compete. We're in a competitive world. We have to compete. Stop talking about borderless worlds. We have borders and we have people who are Americans, and we still see this being fought out with the immigration policy. Because what Americans are saying with these hurricanes in Florida is, you're willing to pay non-Americans, you're giving them $25,000 to buy a home, you're putting them up in nice hotels, they don't have to do any paperwork, you're just putting them up in hotels. Meanwhile, our own citizens are getting devastated by hurricanes, and you say you have no money? Or, you can't they have to do paperwork to get $750 and then more paperwork. Why were you able to do so much for these people that weren't American citizens? And so Americans are like, look, we're tired of treating everybody outside of America better than American citizens themselves. It's just that simple.
Well said. Yeah, global restraint, retrenchment, narrow self-interest, reshoring. We talk about that in economics all the time. Protectionism, and
reshoring.
Exactly.
That's
Reshoring.
absolutely, for your audience that doesn't know, it's again this idea that we can't rely on undependable sources for goods that are vital. And it is a tricky question because, as an economist, right, the global production of goods means that it's very tricky to put tariffs on goods because it will hurt your own supply chains. And so what we're doing with the reshoring and diversifying supply chains is trying to get more alternative suppliers for goods and parts and all kinds of things, because we learned our lesson that, during the pandemic, that you can't rely on one supplier to get what you need. We're having like all kinds of problems with shipping and,
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, I want to go into this hegemon decline. You talked about revisionist states, and they've definitely had growth in power, and they're challenging the status quo. So when we talk about this hegemon decline, no longer has a trade is free, and the United States has, and this is directly quote from your article, the United States has become exactly this type of weary titan, less able to honor external commitments and less interested in doing so too. So is it because of the revisionist states? Are they a big part of how we are this hegemon in decline? Is it because we spread ourselves too thinly? Right? And is that also a part of it? Tell us about this hegemon in decline and the importance of now making America first. And is the main potential existential threat to the United States from within?
Yeah, no, good questions.
Thank you.
Hegemon. Okay, so the first part. Okay, so let's talk about American decline. Like, I'm not a declinist, though. People might think he's very pessimistic and all. I'm not really. I'm not at all. I think America is far stronger than China. I'm much more
Absolutely,
in that
yes.
camp, and I'm not worried at all about America's future or our ability to compete. I think Americans, the genius of America is
Agree.
still far better. I would never trade our economy with the Chinese economy, not even close. But the idea, but this notion of spreading yourself too thin, this is an old concept actually of imperial overstretch. It's like America got to the point, particularly during unipolarity, where we didn't have a sphere of influence because the whole world was an American sphere of influence. We were just, everything mattered to us. The whole world was our backyard. And that's an easy way to overstretch, imperial overstretch. You fritter away your resources defending the periphery. And see, when you start making commitments, when the whole world is your commitment, in a sense, or you have all these far-flung commitments, you then have to defend them. And by defending them, you need bases. And then, so you have all these bases all over the world. Then you have to defend the bases, which are defending all your interests, your far-flung interests. So you have extrinsic interests of these things that are defending the bases, that are defending the, interests, peripheral interests, strategic interests. So then it just becomes to the point where it just gets too costly. Their resources are finite. They're not infinite. And, at some point, you're going to get like a check is going to come back saying, you're overdrawn. You can't pay it. And this is America's debt. You can't like run the world or pretend to run the world. And you got to think of what we got in return for all this money we spent on these foreign adventures, or this illusion or delusion that we run the world. It was very costly. It's been enormously costly. I think the American people are so kept in the dark about how much it actually costs to pretend that you run the world. And so that is imperial overstretch. It's just, you bring yourself down to earth by trying to, run the world, and you can't do it. And, the costs easily outpace the benefits. And that's the question. How many times have you heard in your life any foreign policy person who has run the world, had a chance to, let's talk Jake Sullivan. I debated Jake's on National Security Advisor. Seems to be the mouthpiece and foreign affairs for this administration. I'd like to ask him, or Dick Cheney, or any of these people. Yeah, like, okay, so here's what your empire, your informal empire costs. Tell me, first of all, what did it cost? Because they never really do tell you how much it costs, how much we're spending on foreign entanglements and foreign commitments, and they never tell you. And the media never thinks it's your business to know. Never. And they never hold anyone accountable. Ever, ever, ever hold anyone accountable. Because that happened yesterday. Oh well, like the Afghan war exited. We exited the Afghan war in very, poor fashion. They talked about that, but did they ever talk about what it cost us and what we supposedly were going to achieve, and what did we actually achieve, and who was accountable for all this? We were sending literally suitcases full of $100 bills to the Afghan government, just suitcases of money. Nobody ever, American taxpayer money, nobody accounted
But the billions that went missing too.
That's right.
That?
Exactly. Or all the weaponry that we left on the, in that country that American taxpayers paid for. Nobody cared. But, nobody was held accountable. Nobody's in jail. It's your money. Oh, who cares? So anyway, so where was I? So imperial overstretch. So yeah, the costs completely outpace the benefits. And if you really talk the benefits, what benefits? I mean, I don't even know, like, can you think of a benefit of American foreign policy for the past 30 years since we've had unipolarity? What benefit, tangible benefit, have we seen from all this money that we have spent on how many wars? We were supposed to have a peace dividend at the end of the Cold War. There was no peace dividend. We never had a year of peace. We were in Bosnia, we were in Somalia, we were in, in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan. There was no peace dividend, that's for sure. So, and then we expanded NATO. Now we got a Russia problem, and we got a lot of people. Imagine if Russia attacks Lithuania, Latvia. Hey, we're at war. I know Americans have not been informed of this, but yeah, Latvia and Lithuania now in NATO, along with a lot of countries that you're now under Article 5 of NATO, the NATO treaty, you are now obligated to defend if they're attacked. So good luck with that. I know they're paper commitments, but those are the ones that come back to bite you. But it would be nice if our politicians or our media, which is supposed to be doing a job of informing us, would inform the American people of all the paper commitments we are now obligated to honor that they have not been told about. And I tell you, if you told them, they would be aghast. But anyway, that's imperial overstretch, is this idea that you create, the costs of running an empire outpace the gains enormously. And they just, they bring you back to earth. So that's how states rise, and then they fall. They fall because great powers fall because they overcommit. Particularly, the United States has been one of these global powers, a world power, the likes of which we've never known. I mean, the British Empire at the height of its powers, maybe, but they didn't have the power projection capabilities that the United States has. I mean, not even close. Anyhow, so that's that part of that. Now, the other part of your question was...
Well, is the potential existential threat to the United States actually from within?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, because we've been talking about disinformation. I just have to, I'm really upset about this. And I think, like, if your audience hears anything that they want to take away, it's not new, but I just feel like this has to be said. That
Please say it.
Yeah, the danger from within is that we're going to have people telling us that disinformation is a problem in this country. And of course, they have the solution. And so everybody needs to be, I just heard Hillary Clinton say the other day on TV, we have to have we have to do something about disinformation in this country. I'm like, oh, really? Well, let's just tear up the first, the Constitution.
Yeah, they want to get rid of the Constitution, the First and Second Amendment, right?
Yeah. Who cares about the First Amendment? Who cares about free speech? Like, if it doesn't support, a certain ideological wing of this country, then it's no good. We don't need it. It's disinformation. You know why? Because they're telling cities, just like they said about
who
COVID.
Deems what is that? See, to me, what bothers me, it's very subjective. Who deems what's disinformation?
Of course, that's the whole thing. The whole point is that, like, they're telling us this disinformation must be true. I mean, but I would say to them, okay, this administration actually set up a disinformation bureau. They were working on that until it came to light. They were doing it. And then people say, well, are you kidding me? Like, they don't understand the First Amendment. There's a wing of the, when you say the dangers from within, there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed talking about how liberal professors and the left in this country are talking about what an inconvenience the Constitution is. We got to get rid of it. I'm not making, this is the Wall Street Journal editorial talking about what's actually being said in the academy, inside the Democrat Party. The Constitution is inconvenient for modern times. We got to get rid of it. This is about disinformation or malinformation. You just saw Robert Kennedy's testimony. Robert Kennedy Jr. on the Hill just testified to the malinformation. He was labeled malinformation. It wasn't misinformation. It was just information that was inconvenient or contradicted the government's message. How dare someone do that? So this is the problem. I've said this on record. I the National Intelligence Council, which is the State Department and the CIA, they have a group that does global trends, asked what was the worst problem facing this country in the next 40 years. One of my mentors, who I will not mention, said the problem is misinformation, disinformation. And I wrote, the problem is that people that I used to respect on the left think that the problem is misinformation, disinformation. This is like the greatest problem facing the United States, that these people want to rip up the Constitution and don't seem to understand the value or what free speech is actually designed to protect. It's not designed to protect the correctness of information. It is designed to protect the most reprehensible speech. It is designed not to protect things that we agree on or we find acceptable. It's designed to protect the most horrible things we can think of. And that's what free speech is about. It is not about what they seem to think is. Now, getting back to your question.
That's exactly right. And I just want to stress that point. Yeah. It's about protecting our disagreement.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Things we find reprehensible. You don't need to protect things that we all agree on. You know, and now this idea of facts, who's going to determine that? I would say to these people,
we're going to put Randy in charge of that.
Right. No, we'll put Trump in charge of it. We'll put the MAGA people in charge. See how many people from the left agree to that. But as long as they're the ones doing it. Now, it is funny that a president that says misinforms us constantly about what Trump says in Charlottesville, they've been talking about that. They have been wrong about so many things. They have created so much misinformation. COVID was just like a textbook example, the pandemic, of disinformation from the government and from the left about the vaccines, about how COVID was transmitted, putting people, ruining school kids, not going to school because they're wearing masks, they're doing, it was reprehensible how they misuse government monopolies of information and spread complete disinformation. And yet, but the point is, you know, the government should never do that. We should throw the bums out. That's how you solve the problem. You throw the bums out. You don't have a bureau of disinformation. You know, the nerve, the idea that, like, I could see this coming. You could see it coming because, you know, I know I'm being very ideological, but I'm sorry. If it were my party or my side, I would say the exact same things I'm saying. If my side were talking about censoring people, if Twitter or anything was run by the right and conservatives, and they were censoring, I would say the same things I'm saying now. This country, the most important thing we have is free speech.
Free speech is the bedrock of any democracy.
Absolutely. And when you start telling me that you don't believe in free speech, and this is what their party's saying, whether it's AOC or Hillary Clinton or whomever it is, and this is the party that said that Trump and Charlottesville said both sides. There are good people on both sides. This is the party that spread so much disinformation. How dare they talk about the right spreading disinformation? And let me tell you, they run everything. The only thing that the right controls in this country is the Supreme Court. But that's not, you know, that's because we got more judges than they did. And what are they doing? They say things like, okay, Roe versus Wade. Let the people decide. It's not in the Constitution. Oh my gosh. Then the left says, oh my God, they want to get rid of women's right to, you know, abortion. What do you mean? Like, you don't trust the people? Like, so it's undemocratic and terrible to let the people decide policy issues? That's what the people are supposed to do. And then they say they're protecting democracy. As they say, oh, as long as the Supreme Court are old people who support the left and are judicial activists that will enact things that the people don't vote on, but should be voting on, then it's good. But if the Republicans say, look, the people should decide, this is a political issue, it's not in the Constitution, then they say they're against, they're not against anything. They're for the people. They're for democracy. Let democracy work. But now all of a sudden that's a problem. Oh, they're not elected. Yeah, that's the point. That's why they shouldn't be deciding policy, that we should do that. But see, everything they say that we're doing is what they're doing. They want to throw their opponents in jail. They want to, you know, they completely politicize the legal system, the justice system in this country. And then they don't want free flows of information. you see the news media, they interview their candidate. They're working for the Democrat Party. They do debates where it's 3 against 1. And this is fairness to them. 6 against 1 is fairness. That's a fair breakdown. And then they have the nerve to say, one side's against democracy. You have to vote for them because they're for democracy. And they keep bringing up January 6th, which they have defined as an insurrection. It's not an insurrection. There were no tanks. There was no way to take over the American government. The only people, they say they killed people. The only people that got killed were the people in the job. They did not kill any policemen. Again, disinformation. They don't know what they're talking about. Nobody killed a policeman from MAGA or from that side. The only people that were killed were the people protesting. And so, all right, it was not the greatest of afternoons, but it was very understandable if you put it in historical context. It's easy to see why Republicans would think they stole that election. Yeah, the kind of voting that I would love to see that election run the opposite direction. I'd love to see what the left would say. If they went to bed and their candidate was leading in all these states, and then when they woke up, they found out, oh, they counted all the ballots that were, informal ballot that were, they were mail-in ballots, and they were coming back 9-1 Republican. Oh, and the people running it were all Republicans. You think they might complain? You think they might be suspicious? Like, why were 9 out of 10 mail-in votes? Now, I'm not saying that it was stolen, but I'm saying after 3 years of conspiracy theory hoax, after 2 impeachments, which were ridiculous, a Ukrainian phone call, which had nothing to, they impeached the guys. They had 3 years of a hoax. You might think that people on the right might not trust the elections anymore, particularly when they're mail-in ballot. Like, oh my gosh, they have no empathy at all for the right. Every media outlet, all of the mainstream media, totally in with the Democrats, totally. The academics. So imagine universities. They're 95% liberals in universities. Imagine for a day or a week that universities were 95% run by conservative Republicans, MAGA people. You think they might be protesting? You think they might not believe an election result? Like, this is why, the number one problem in this country is a civil war. And is it coming? It is coming. We're close to it. If they do not stop throwing their opponents in jail, creating a media system, at least, where they're so unfair that it is so obvious that you can't trust them. Like a child could see how unfair they were in the debates. Anybody could. How much are you going to push the right before finally you are going to get a civil war? I mean, you can't keep doing these things. Like, I would say to my party, if you start using the justice system to go after Biden, Clinton. When Trump became president, they said, are you going to go after Clinton? All right, he said, throw her in jail, lock her up. Okay. But when they asked him, are you going to lock her up? He goes, of course not. We don't need to do that. We win an election. You win an election. They didn't do that. If my side's locking up their opponents, I'm going to say to them, you don't ever do that. Don't ever do that, because it shows that you give the appearance of using the justice system for political ends. I will not put up with that. I will not put up with that. If they start throwing Biden in jail, I'll say, no, don't do that. You're harming democracy. It was like when Nixon knew in 1960 that the Kennedys had stolen the election in Illinois with the ballot box. He could have easily, he had every reason in the world to contest that election. But he said, no, it would be bad for the American people. They won't believe in their elections anymore. And believe it or not, the man that they hated so much said, no, he knew they had done that. There was a lot of things that were going on that were not kosher. But he was big enough to say, no, he never got any credit for it. But, that's what I would say to my party if you did it. Like, you have to consider the perception of fairness. That is so important to democracy. You say the threat from within. When people no longer perceive that things are fair, That's it. And I'll tell you one thing, civilization is it rests on a very thin reed. We think it's so, but once things start coming unraveled, you could get a civil war in this country. You could. I hope it never happens. But we're closer than we've been since the last one, because it doesn't take much, I don't believe, to start unraveling. People no longer trust the institutions. It's like the news media, the legacy news media. I just can't believe how much damage they are doing to themselves. If they had only tried to be fair, and let's say this, how much rested on the presidential debates. If they had tried to be fair, like CNN originally, I don't think they did such a great job, but it seemed like they were trying to be fair, or at least considered that. And people said, this is good. This is good. But since then, no. And, this is why the legacy media is dead in the war, never coming back. The people are really smart. Trust the people. I always trust the collective wisdom of the American people. They're much smarter than the media or their politicians.
Agree. I believe in America. I believe in the people. And I have faith that we are going to do the right thing and take care of ourselves. We can't have this civil war.
No.
That's another excellent discussion here, an excellent point you brought up. We were talking about the global disorder, and we talked about potential for World War III, nuclear war, and now we've shifted to the domestic unrest that we've had. And it seems that there's so much polarity. The right is just, and the left have just pulled apart, and they just hate each other so much. It's like projection, and like you said, it's like duplicity. They say one thing and they do another, and they're pointing fingers, and they're both calling each other liars. And at some point that needs to be put aside, and we need to join together as a nation instead of having this.
But this is related to entropy. This is the whole argument. I made it in that book a long time ago. I said when you have so much information in the world, the average person becomes apathetic and tunes out. And what that does is it leaves the two most polarized parts of points of view can cut through the noise. Like the loudest, shrillest voices are going to be the only ones left. And that's what we kind of see, is that MSNBC, CNN, look at CNN. I mean, look at how shrill it's become, how partisan, how polarizing. Because, I mean, can you remember Bernard Shaw? Do you even remember when CNN was Bernard Shaw? I mean, this was he did not reek of liberal, the left or nothing like CNN today. And those were the days when politics were much more moderate, and people understood the value of getting along and respecting the opposition and all that. Like there was a sense of civility in the world. And there is no civility anymore. And that has a lot to do with entropy, I do think. Because it's information entropy. It's the noisiness of the world means that only the most shrill voices can cut through.
Yeah.
It's a signal to noise ratio. And people don't want, the people that are left that are still tuned into the program, they want, they want people to support their views. This is when I say in the book that when you have a lot of information, everyone can form their own personal world.
Yes.
They could support their views with any fact that they want, because there are so many facts that are accessible to them that they can, have a personal view of the world that is insulated from anything outside of it. And that's what we see. That's why we have such polarization in the world. Think back at the halcyon days of the 60s and 70s, when the news was 30 minutes long. That was it. There was the nightly news with Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite, and this was 30 minutes, you know? How much could you say in 30 minutes? It was just the facts, please. That's it.
Now it's 24/7.
24/7 opinions, and it's the most polarizing opinion. And to get, when you have so many, like I talked about you mentioned it in the beginning, the blog, the sphere of, media.
Infosphere and the rise of social media.
What was the first one?
Truthiness.
Yeah, yeah. When you have so many sources of information, it's really hard to
And I think the
get
decline
eyeball.
in like religion and spirituality, I
Yeah.
think that contributes as well to this.
Well, I think it's coming back because people like myself and yourself,
Like
and
Elon
like
Musk
the
talked
Russell
about that.
Brands. You notice Russell
Yeah.
Brand and see Russell Brand. I really admire him. We're not on the same. He was on the left and I was on the right. But the more we follow, the more he's come way back to the right. He's a Trump supporter now, but in a sense, what he's for and what he senses the world is the left is against is free speech, a marketplace of ideas, and more civility and local control. And what I was going to say is that when you have a lot of noise, the only way to cut through is to be shrill. But at some point, the people say, we want civility in our politics. We want that. And you're going to see the rise of people who seem like they are telling the truth or they're searching for the truth. They're not just being dogmatic. They want to listen to everyone, and they're not afraid of ideas that they don't hold. They're willing to change. They're willing to be swayed by others' opinions because they're going to listen to them and they're going to respect them and not just say, oh, well, if it's coming from them, I'm not going to listen to what they're saying. And this is the problem, that people don't even listen to certain people because they say, oh, well, if this person says it, look, you can't trust that source. And so I do feel like, and then you look at religion, you see Russell Brand, he's become Catholic, I believe, not just Christian, I'm not sure. But, and you, Candace Owens, and you're seeing like a return to religious beliefs because people have sort of had it with the secular politics and the secular world and being sold on materialism, and they kind of realize that there's nothing going to be in this for them, and that if you want like a real peace, you have to find a spiritual peace. You're not going to find it in the secular world, which is, it has become the left. I know people say, well, I'm being unfair. Sure, I'm on the right. I'm not making any bones about it. But like I said, everything I say about the left, if my side were doing it, I would condemn it. But I think what the left has done is they've tried to create a new religion. It's a new religion of identity politics and, calling people you don't agree with racist. And they're waging like a holy war against the right. This is the truth. They are waging but they don't have a true, like, it's almost like a religion where they're at the center of it. It's like where I live. Everyone has a Harris something sign out. And like they have signs all over the lawns. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Why is this important for you to tell me what you believe? Because this is their religion. Like they think I'm a good person. Look at me, I support the left. And that's why they're demonizing MAGA people as, racist. They're calling them every name in the book. They're fascist, they're racist, they're this, because this is their new religion. Politics has become a religion for the left because they don't have religion, or they don't truly believe it. There's when you have a society, I'm not saying everyone, so don't, tell me. I'm just saying that a secular society is going to polarize around political issues to the extent that we're seeing today, particularly the left, because that's their view. They're waging holy war.
That's right.
And anyone that doesn't agree is the enemy, and they're not just the enemy, they're the devil.
Exactly.
They're demonizing people on the right, and they're even demonizing religious people. Like there's nothing like, if you want to get them unhappy, talk about, white Christians, oh my gosh, they have to go.
And the white male, that's the worst.
White male Christians, they have to go. I mean, they are just poisonous to them. But this is why I think you're seeing a lot of return, a desecularization of society. I think people are finally going to figure out that the material world, the political, secular world, you're never going to find peace. If that's where if you're looking for peace or a peaceful life, you're not going to find it there. If you're looking for the truth, you're not going to find it there. You're looking for happiness, you're not going to find it there. And in fact, you got to put your ego aside. You've got to understand that your ego is what's ultimately going to make you miserable, and that you have to adopt, a more spiritual view of the world, like joy, like the Christian philosophy of joy. Jesus first, others second, yourself third.
And the golden rule, do unto others as you want unto yourself.
Right, or just try to spread some love and joy. Love. Try to
love your enemies, love everyone. Right. Spread love.
Right, you have to try to love your enemies. You at least try to understand, forgive. You have to forgive, and you have to try to end suffering. You have to try. You're not going to make the world free of sin or suffering, but you can do your part. That's the whole reason we're here, is to try to do things for other people. And I think ultimately that is what is going to save this country. Is that people are going to finally figure out that, these political battles are secondary and will not bring peace and joy to the world if we don't have it inside ourselves, and if we don't look to a higher spiritual power and see what our true place in the universe is, or try to figure out why we're really here. But that's my feel. I feel like when you look at it's all about, the devil's in the details. I hate to say that, but that's, it's like, but like you look at Russell Brand, I just think he's a much better person today than he used to be, because you see in him a respect for other people and other people's viewpoints, and a sort of kindness and a gentleness. He's so different than, for example, Bill Maher, who creates a movie called Religiosity, which puts down religion, sees no value in it whatsoever. I mean, if I had to find a secular, figurehead, it would be a Bill Maher type. Well, do you want that? He's an angry man. For anyone willing to read, there is a good book. It's not great. It's a little bit, it's got a lot of food for thought. Not so sure it's all worth the chewing, but it's something called The Age of Anger. Yeah, it's a good book. It's called The Age of Anger, and I think that this is a good. I don't know that he's from India, or at least he's from Indian descent. I can't think of his name, but it's a good book about the fact that the world is sort of waking up, that, in a sense, that the Renaissance view, the secular Renaissance view of we're all going to do better and get wealthier and we'll be happier and we'll just keep getting wealthier and happier. They're realizing, no, that's not the way. And that's what's creating all this anger in the world, is that, and you see it in this country, that when you don't seem to care anymore about spiritual values, nothing is going to save you. Nothing will save you. You will just get into, like I said, the age of anger. Anger and resentment. You need to have a more spiritual view to the world if we're going to coexist and love each other and make the world a better place. Otherwise, this is going to be an egoistic world where everyone steps on everyone else and nothing good will happen. And I believe people are good. People are basically good. There's no doubt about it. That's why they're waking up. They're waking up. I just, I'm just pointing to Russell Brand because he's a very visible symbol of this. And it's happening all over the world, people I don't know. But I'm saying, look at how much happier he seems and how much gentler and kinder he is. And how much you say, wow, if my opposition were like that, I would have so much respect and really, love and, almost, well, just a certain love and understanding that these are our fellow human beings. For example, like what I'm saying may sound like, where is he going? I saw RFK Jr. just yesterday in that testimony saying he pleaded at the end, and he was pointing to Kucinich, who was from Ohio, Kucinich, the liberal. He was saying, look, we need to get back to civility. We have to love each other. We have to, believe that we're good and that there is so much value in being able to disagree, but still respect and care about each other, not just tolerate, but care about each other. And he was saying, when I was in the Senate, Kucinich, he would, I can't remember the Republican, he was talking about the chair of the committee, I just can't think of his name. And he said he used to go, no two people could disagree more than they did politically, but they were good friends, and they would go out afterwards and get dinner, and he would go to his daughter's basketball games and be cheering for him. And that's what I want to see. I want us to see that we're all Americans and that we can disagree and still respect each other. And not call each other names or fascist or evil, or think that, we just can't be like this. And one way to do that is to see our common humanity and to find a spiritual, when you become more spiritual, you see that we're all one, and that, God loves us. We're all here for a reason. And if God can forgive our sins, surely we can forgive each other.
Love this. Love.
Yeah.
Love. That's
We
what we
need
need.
that. We need that. Love is all we need. We do
That's
need
the
that.
solution, is love.
It's true. It is
It's
true.
true.
Like
And
a lot of
the
the
dead
60s.
and the Grateful Dead.
Right, exactly. We're back to the Grateful Dead. We can end there because it's like when
And
the
you know what?
60s, no matter what
Yeah.
people say about it being, the 60s were incredibly naive and incredibly idealistic. Yes, but it was a really good idealism. There's nothing wrong with peace, love, and understanding, as Elvis Costello said. There's nothing wrong with that because, in the end, that's what society needs the most. We need that. Like back then, when you were liberal and you cared about other people and you tried to create communes, and maybe you went too far, but at least there was a sense like the hippies that I knew back in Long Island, Port Jefferson, back in the 60s and 70s, those hippies would be like, they would, when I was in the band, they would create shirts for us. They would design shirts. There was this one woman, she was really your typical hippie. She symbolized everything that the hippie movement was. But you know what she used to say when she would give us the shirts and we would pay her the money? She goes, you're wonderful and beautiful. She used to say that every time. You're wonderful and beautiful. And she said it. That's what she thought. And those were like when I felt the left was idealistic and they were really caring and they practiced what they preached, they were preaching love and understanding and they were saying it. And what's wrong with that? There's like a movie with Peter Sellers, I Love You, Alice B. Toklas, it really captures this idea. It's funny, but it was made during the time. It's funny, but they were easy to make fun of, the hippies and the left, but there was a lot to be said for that. We need to get back to that.
Agree. Well, you're wonderful and beautiful. And this has been amazing.
So are you, Roseanne.
Thank you. And what a long, strange trip it's been.
Yeah, it's been a long, strange trip, but look, it's a moment.
This is wonderful. Love. I think there's nothing better to begin and end, like a full circle. I like to always use the infinity sign. Infinite love. But
eternal love.
Eternal love, absolutely. And that's what connects all of us. And God in all of us and God's source of love. You know, that's what we're all
Nothing wrong
about.
with that. Maybe
No,
old and corny, but there's nothing wrong with that.
no. Thank you so much for this. It's been
You're
amazing.
welcome.
It's always so transformative as
Well-
we do these discussions, and because you're so profound on many levels, and
Well,
this has been wonderful.
thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Always great to
Absolutely.
see you.
Always great to see you as well. Thank you to everyone.
All right.
Love,
Take care. Love.
love.